Let's summarize. This beast that rises from the earth must be a kingdom. This beast that rises from the earth that has two horns, the two horns must represent that in that nation there are two what? There are two kingdoms. And they have to be two kingdoms that Jesus recognized because they are two horns like what? Two horns like a lamb. And we know that the two kingdoms that Jesus recognized are the kingdom of Caesar, the civil government, and the kingdom of God, which is on earth, the church. Now let's talk a little bit about the history of the United States of America. What nation in the world arose around the year 1798? One nation that recognized in its founding documents the legitimate simultaneous existence of two kingdoms separate one from another. There's only one nation in the world that originated as one nation that recognized two kingdoms, the same kingdoms that Jesus recognized as being separate one from the other. Now what I want to do is go through the history of the United States to show you that in its founding documents you have this idea of one nation composed of two kingdoms, separate one from the other. Now the history of the United States can be divided into two great periods. The first period is known as the colonial period. And the second period is known as the constitutional period. You know, the constitutional fathers, men such as George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, and Benjamin Franklin knew three things. These were the constitutional fathers that arose around the year 1798 to write the founding documents of the United States. They knew three things. First of all, they knew the history of the church in the Middle Ages. In fact, do you know that every document, founding document of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights were all ratified before the beast received its deadly wound? As the first kingdom was coming to an end or receiving its deadly wound, the other kingdom in its founding documents was rising to power. That's very, very interesting. And the founding fathers knew the history of the church in the Middle Ages. They also knew the history of the United States in the colonial period. And they also knew their Bibles, as we're going to notice. Now, the constitutional fathers knew, and they were living at the end of the 1260 years, that when church and state are joined together, the automatic result is persecution. For example, they knew the history of John Huss, that man who was convicted and burned at the stake for his religious convictions. They knew, for example, that he had been kept in subhuman conditions in prison squalor. They knew that false witnesses were called to testify against him. They knew that he had violated no civil laws. They knew that he was tried for the religious convictions of his conscience. They knew that he was called before a religious tribunal, much like the Sanhedrin at first. He knew that that religious tribunal had pronounced a death sentence against him. And they knew that then they took him to the emperor, to have the emperor stamp his imprimatur upon the sentence of death. And they knew that because of his religious convictions, he was burned at the stake. They knew the history of the church in the Middle Ages when church and state are united or joined together.